But we're really, really excited to be welcoming the Blackfoot Challenge here with us today. They're a conservation organization based out of Montana, and we'll be talking about a learning journey of coexisting with grizzlies tonight. So thank you to all of our panelists for being here and to everyone in the audience that's joined on so far. Here's the agenda for the webinar. So we will give an introduction of Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative, followed by an intro of the Blackfoot Challenge. And then we'll jump into some individual experiences of coexistence from 4 of our panelists who are based out of the Blackfoot watershed. And we'll finish off with a Q&A period. So for all of those in the audience, please feel free to pop any questions you may have throughout this webinar into the chat. There's no audio function as it is a webinar, but feel free to pop anything into the chat. And my colleague Jolene and I will be monitoring that throughout, and we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can at the end. So to get started, first of all, my name is Erica Van Loon. I work with Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative, as does Jolene Patrick, who's also here. And I am based in the Pemberton Meadows in Southwest British Columbia. So with Coast to Cascades, we are a small nonprofit, non-government organization that was started back in 2013 with a focus on the recovery and connectivity of threatened grizzly bear populations in Southwest BC. As a lot of us that work in this space, on the panel, we know that collaboration is really key. So we work with area First Nations, local communities and NGOs, scientists and government agencies to carry out a lot of the work that we do on the ground. So we're really grateful to work with these amazing science advisors that form a lot of the basis for the work that we do. Dr. Bruce McClellan and Dr. Michelle McClellan both are in the audience tonight. Dr. Michael Proctor and Dr. Lana Chernello is on our panel tonight, so she can speak to any biology-related questions. But yeah, we're really grateful to work with all of these grizzly bear biologists, and they form the basis of many of the things that we do. So as kind of an overview here, this is a map of North America, obviously, that shows more of the historic versus current distribution of grizzly bears. So looking back to 1850, we can see here in this lighter shade of red, grizzly bears used to roam all the way down to the border by Mexico. And our current distribution is limited to this brighter red tract here. So looking at the areas we're focusing on today, us as Coast to Cascades, we're based in this Pemberton area. Not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you can, yeah, okay, great. And the Blackfoot Challenge is based in the Blackfoot watershed in Western Montana down here. So these are both areas that have or are currently facing grizzly bear recovery. And we have lots to learn from the folks down in Montana. So specific to our focus as Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative, we really work in these 2 key areas here that are called fracture zones. So we have the Pemberton Meadows fracture here and the Portage Road fracture here. Zooming out a bit, we have Vancouver all the way down here. So this is Southwest BC, and those fracture zones are physical barriers that may prevent grizzly bears from bringing genetics, physically crossing into other population units. So a lot of our work in terms of connectivity and coexistence is focused on those fractures to help provide safe passage for grizzly bears and bring new genetics, hopefully, into some of these critically endangered populations that are living here in Southwest BC. So this photo here is more of an aerial shot of the Pemberton Meadows. So one of those fracture zones. And As you can see, it is a highly agricultural landscape for those who may not be aware. And over the past 5 or so years, we've really been facing recovery at the forefront in these more human-dominated landscapes as grizzly bears slowly recover. And although population growth is very slow as they're slow reproducers, we have been seeing that more over the years. So as an organization, we have these two kind of umbrella focus areas, connectivity and coexistence. And connectivity is more focused on the bear side habitat, ensuring safe passage through really key zones like this here, where they have these safe areas to travel through. And coexistence is more focused on that human element. So as we face recovery in these human dominated landscapes, coexistence is really, really key. So what that may look like or actually mean is sharing a landscape with grizzly bears in a way that keeps both people and bears safe. And we're so grateful to have the Blackfoot Challenge here tonight because it is possible. There are ways to live alongside grizzly bears and other animals like wolves. And as the folks in the Blackfoot Challenge will get into, they're about 10 to 20 years ahead of us in this journey. So we're really excited to learn from them. And for those of us in BC, it's a great model to look to and something that we as an organization also aspire to be in 10 years. And yeah, as humans who live in these areas, we do have a responsibility to coexist and to minimize conflict with grizzlies and help them remain wild. As Costa Cascades, we do have coexistence initiatives. I'll touch on two tonight. But at the forefront of coexistence, I think, is really outreach and education and a knowledge base of the grizzly bear species. So helping people understand grizzly bears in general, their biology, their behavior, their habitat, to help build that knowledge base and understand A, their importance, and B, what it really means to live alongside them and how that's possible. So outreach and education is a lot of the times the foundation of coexistence. And one of the on-the-ground initiatives that we do at Costa Cascades is also electric fencing. And the Blackfoot Challenge is a really great model for this as well. But here we have a cost share program where we help cover a portion of material costs towards electric fences that are a proven conflict mitigation effort for grizzly bears. So these fences are designed to a specific number of wires specific to bear behavior to limit their access to what's called attractants, so human-based food sources. And as we see here on the left, this is a grizzly bear family unit walking directly on the outside of an electric fence, not getting into my family's carrot crop. So we're really grateful for electric fencing as a proven method to reduce that conflict. In our priority areas, we have installed 19 fences to date and secured about 30 acres of attractants. So why should we even be here? Why should we be talking about this? I think a lot of us could go on and on about this all night. But to get into this briefly, grizzly bears are really, really amazing and important species to have on our landscape. We can think of them as an umbrella species. So we open an umbrella and we have this cover over our head. If we think of that as a grizzly bear, because they have such large home ranges and share habitat in so many diverse areas with so many different species, by protecting and conserving grizzly bears, we're also helping to protect and conserve all those species that they share the land with. They're also ecosystem engineers, so they help with plant biodiversity, nutrient dispersal through their day-to-day eating activities, and they help regulate prey populations. So in general, when we look at grizzly bears on a landscape, they're a really great barometer for signaling a healthy environment. And as humans on this land, we all need a healthy environment to survive and thrive in. So grizzly bears are our friends for that reason. And not just from an environmental standpoint, but from a cultural and spiritual importance as well. They're really important symbols within First Nations culture as well. So all the reasons to be here today talking about coexistence. That's all from the Coast to Cascades side. If you want to follow along our social medias, please scan these QR codes here. Any questions, if you don't want to pop in the chat here, feel free to email us at any point. The rest of the evening, we'll mainly be hearing from the Blackfoot Challenge team. So I'll pass on to our panel to first give a brief introduction of each one of them, starting with Seth. And then Seth will go into his presentation on the Blackfoot Challenge.
Great. Well, thanks, Erica and Jolene, for having all of us. We are really honored to be here and appreciate the chance to sort of share our journey. My name is Seth Wilson. I'm currently the executive director of the Blackfoot Challenge. I got my start with grizzly bears in private lands and private landowners in the early 2000s when I was working on my doctoral research, and I helped start some of the programs that you'll hear about tonight through our wildlife committee. I was our first wildlife committee coordinator. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and look forward to any questions you have, and a real nice evening. So thanks again, Erica.
On to Eric. You're muted, Eric. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I'm Eric Graham. I'm the current Blackfoot Challenge Wildlife Program Coordinator. I've been working in this field for 25 plus years now. It seems crazy to say that, but I actually started working with Jamie Jonkel back around 99, 2000, and then started working with the Blackfoot Challenge in 2013 and 14 as a range rider, and then got hired on in 15 for a full-time position.
Awesome. Lee?
Sure. My name is Lee Kelly. Thanks for inviting us to be on with you tonight. I manage about a 40,000 acre place in the watershed. My husband and I have raised our family on it. We've been on the place for close to 20 years. And we run beef cattle and bison and grow alfalfa and have bee yards and whatnot, and have participated in various different programs with the challenge, which we can dive into later.
Awesome. Denny?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Denny Iverson. I'm a board member of the Blackfoot Challenge, probably, I guess, 25 years. Too damn long, but anyhow, and our family ranch is just west of Lee's operation. And we run a cow-calf operation and raise hay and some grain crops as well. So, yeah. Good to be here.
Great.
And Jamie?
Yeah, James Jonkel with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. I am part of the Region 2 Bear Management Team. And thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. And then I want to do a shout out to Bruce McClellan. We go back a long, long way, back in the mid 70s. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
Yeah, awesome. Over to you, Seth.
Okay. We'll see if we can get the technology to work. Very good. And I will go into, let's see. How's the full screen mode? Is that coming through, Erica?
Yeah, got it.
Great. Well, again, thanks to everyone for having us. And I also just want to say we've got Jennifer Shonen, our communications director, on from the Blackfoot Challenge, and Randy Gazda, who's our wildlife committee chair. So thanks for being on the panel. And then thanks Eric, Lee, and Denny, and Jamie for taking some time tonight. So I'm going to try to pack in 24 years in about 10 to 12 minutes, sort of trying to very briefly describe our journey of coexisting with grizzly bears. And thanks, Erica, for a really nice overview. You set sort of that context for us where we are with respect to bears and that population. So we're out here in Western Montana, south of Glacier National Park, and a large wilderness area complex of national forests here in the Blackfoot watershed. It's 1.5 million acres, which is about the size of a little state in the east coast of the U.S., the state of Delaware, if you might imagine that. So it's pretty good size place, and it's a very intact working landscape in Montana, if not one of the more intact working landscapes in sort of parts of the U.S. West. I'll be talking a bit more about some of our focused efforts inside that project area. We've got 7 communities, very low population density, about 2,800 households, 10,000 year-round residents. Main land use practices and driver of our rural economy is cattle ranching, forestry, and recreation. Just a little, let's see if I can get my slide to advance, just a few images to show some of those drivers of our local economy. Again, largely agricultural, multi-generational families, largely cow-calf ranching operations, and some recreation and some forestry. The Blackfoot Challenge, we are a collaborative-based conservation group, a community-based group that's been around for more than 30 years. Our mission has brought a lot of people together, whether you're a conservationist or whether you're an agricultural family working landscape and you care about the rural way of life in the Blackfoot. Our mission statement, I think, has been a great way to bring a lot of people over many, many years together to conserve and steward a very beautiful part of Montana. We were formed as an NGO in 1993. And, some of our key foundations really have been based on, first, communication. That's been really our bread and butter, working with people, communicating thoughtfully and respectfully with people who are different has been key to building trust. We've worked very hard over many years to build public and private partnerships across these land ownership boundaries, whether it's state, federal, or private. We've worked very hard to cultivate those partnerships. And we've really tried to create a big tent and be inclusive over all these years. The people who live here, those communities, are critical to our mission and our work. And we have a lot of folks who may not live in the Blackfoot, but who are very interested. And grizzly bears, as you know, bring up a lot of different interests from all sides. And so we really work to sort of manage and include all of those different values. As a community-based organization, we work on what's important to our 7 different communities and residents in the watershed, whether it's water or forestry. These are all of our committees. So we do a lot of work, not just grizzly bears and wolves, but in addition to that really keep a lot of people at the table. We'll talk tonight about our wildlife program, specifically about our work to coexist with grizzly bears. We've also we live with wolves as well, and some of those programs and tools overlap. But tonight we'll primarily talk about grizzly bears and some of the conflicts that we address. First and foremost, we deal with livestock losses. In general, we're trying to minimize undesirable damage to property and also manage for human safety. We've got grain silo damage from bears. Bears get into people's homes, sheds, barns, and that we've got that sort of age-old issue, as we know, with garbage when it comes to living with grizzly bears. Bears also find crops, corn, fruit trees, beehives. And Erica mentioned some of the attractants that you all have to deal with and manage, but these are very common all through different contexts in North America and in other parts of the world. I don't want to bore you or have you try to look at all the tiny small font here, but I just want to suggest that this takes time. It's taken 24 years of our work. Some of the first bear conflicts began in the late 1990s. Jamie was there front and center to start addressing this. We had a human fatality in 2001. And in response to that, by 2001, we had formed a wildlife committee under the auspices of the Blackfoot Challenge. And doing that, we really, first and foremost, we needed to have landowners and ranchers from our 7 communities on board. We had Jamie Jonko from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, our federal biologists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NGOs were invited, researchers and private businesses, and that composition, that group formed in 2001, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And as sort of a young, naive, fresh out of graduate school person, I took on the coordinating of that committee. We had no money, but we had a lot of ideas, and we wanted to respond to the community. So it was really an honor to be there to help get some of this stuff started. The first couple of years, we really listened to landowners and ranchers and residents. We wanted to understand what they were seeing and what they thought the problem was, so that there's a very sort of important phase we went through, this problem identification. It helped us set some goals. Jamie was there at the very beginning, talking to us about bear behavior and and how bears might find different types of attractants. And we sort of focused in on boneyards and calving areas as important attractants that we wanted to sort of manage for to minimize issues. One of the first things we did was sort of sit down with the ranching community and map out locations. Here in yellow are boneyards, which are places where dead stock is natural death losses. Our carcasses are put in these dead pits or carcass pits, and then we mapped out locations of calving areas. And as bears were finding these boneyards, it was leading to conflicts with live calves in those calving areas. We knew wolves weren't here at the time in the early 2000s, but they showed up by 2007. So we really sort of wrapped our arms around the idea of managing boneyards and protecting calving areas as a sort of a first start for some of our programs. We got our carcass removal program started in 2003. Today, we remove about 500 to 600 carcasses off of roughly 50 to 75 ranches annually. We just sort of finished up that program here in May, and we can talk a bit more about that. Carcasses are composted by our partners at Montana Department of Transportation, who are also dealing with road-killed deer and elk, and so they compost both wild ungulates and livestock carcasses at their facility. They're quite good at this, and we're very thankful to that partnership. We also started in the early days. This is well before social media and Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff. Some of us have gray hair here on the panel, but we sort of just asked neighbors to sort of form networks, and we use good old-fashioned telephone trees to have landowners and residents call each other when grizzly bears might be out, and just letting each other know, take in the garbage, take down a bird feeder. Just a very simple way to get more eyes and ears out into the community. And Jamie was really instrumental in helping us do this, and was very supportive of sort of empowering the local residents to sort of help get a sense of what was happening with bears. This was low cost, and it's worked very well for many years. We've built a lot of electric fences, dozens and dozens of fences, and I'll show you some photos of those, but we focused in the early years on areas where we were having conflicts with bears. So we knew you can't put bear fences in all parts of these landscapes. They're too big. So you've got to really focus where these hot spots are. And so we've tried to do that over many years. Here's just a few photos, some beehive fences, some calving area fences. And more recently, we've been trying to put electric fences not only around calving areas, but around ranch residences when, say, a ranch family is interested in that. One way we've been able to do that is to use drive over electrified mats. And this is helpful when you have, say, a ranch residence or an area where you need a lot of access. You don't want to have to open and close gates all day, but you want to tie these electrified mats in with an electrified fence. And this has been sort of very appreciated, I think, by different folks and families throughout the watershed. So that we're using these drive over mats coupled with an electric exclusion fence. And this is the same ranch, the Two Creek Ranch, where we have a lot of grizzly bear activity. Just wanted to show a series of images of a bear approaching one of the drive over mats and turning tail and heading off. So they work quite well. We do electrified fencing on our rural transfer sites. We do a lot of bear resistant trash bins, and we've got hundreds of these out with our communities. It's sort of one of these long-term important parts of living with bears is containing attractants, and garbage is, of course, one of the keys out there. Local residents have taken their own steps to contain their attractants, whether it's garbage or livestock feed. So that's really encouraging when local residents are figuring out their own solutions. We do a lot of bear awareness with students all across the watershed, with hunters and the general public, bear spray. Eric's doing an electric fence demo here in a couple of weeks. So we're always working on that education piece in all sorts of different ways. So what does all this get you? Again, just these are confirmed property damages and livestock depredations from grizzly bears. These are data from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We got our start here in the early 2000s. Generally, we've seen a downward trend in conflicts. We had a spike in 2018 when we had a very poor food year, natural food year for grizzly bears, and that's not uncommon to see a spike when you have those berry crop failures and other food source issues. In general, we've had a low downward trend in conflicts, and in the last 4 years or so, we have about 8 conflicts per year, 2 to 3 livestock depredations per year, and we've got about 8,000 to 10,000 head of livestock in the watershed. So we feel pretty good about these numbers, and we hope our efforts continue to help keep conflicts low. I'm going to finish up with some of the lessons that we've learned. We felt very lucky that we had the existing capacity of the Blackfoot Challenge. You know, when Jamie and myself and others were coming to the table in the early 2000s, we didn't need to build a brand new bridge. We didn't need to start our own new NGO. We were very grateful to have the Blackfoot Challenge that had that sort of organizational capacity to take us under their umbrella and form this new committee. So if there's existing capacity in the areas where you work, there may or may not be a fit, but look for them to see if you can build on that existing capacity. We felt very lucky we could do that. You know, those of us in the grizzly bear coexistence business, we often, I think, and I'm, just generalizing a bit here, but, sometimes I think we forget that it takes time. We know the tools. We have a lot of tools that are out there, and sometimes we need to take the time to build the trust and relationships before you just simply approach people with them. And let me just show you another slide to sort of illustrate this. It really, if you think about where to invest your time, it's really sort of brick by brick in this pyramid to build the trust, communication, the partnerships, and the decision-making with those local communities. We invested a lot of time here over the years, and we have a lot of the tools that we need to live with grizzly bears. Too often we rush to implement the tools with our landowners and our residents and our communities. Spend the time building those partnerships. Every social and ecological context is a bit different, but if you invest your time here, I think the tools are all there, and it's easier to implement them and get them to work for both bears and people. We talk about focal species as ecologists, but we sort of looked at our system and thought a lot about focal people. People like Jamie Jonko or Lee Kelly tonight on the panelists. They're incredible resources. They're leaders. And you have them in all of the communities where you're working. So if you find those focal people who have the respect, who are leaders and have standing in their communities, it's really helpful. to work with them and build those relationships to help bring the entire community on board. Working with the state of Montana, with our wildlife managers like Jamie Jonkel and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 24 plus years has been key. So you really need those government agency folks at the table with you. We found that to be in our case. And you do need to build these relationships across our divides. And the U.S. is incredibly polarized today. Whether you're a blue Democrat or a red Republican, we need to work in that pragmatic purple where we can build those trust and respectable and credible relationships. It's really about those relationships with people. And we've really tried to be apolitical to focus on solving problems. This takes time. I mentioned that earlier. We talk about proper pacing. You can't rush these solutions in rural communities. It takes a lot of communication. When we started our wildlife committee, a quick story, we started meeting in Missoula, which is a city about an hour outside the watershed. We were having meetings during the day, and no landowners or residents were showing up. So we moved to smaller group meetings in the watershed at night, and we served food to people. Something simple as that really brought people together, and that sort of really was the genesis of our wildlife committee. Coming together in the evenings when ranchers had the time to be there was critical. Made all the difference in building sort of that trust and having that communication properly paced over time. I'll just finish by saying I've learned a lot from watching Eric as our wildlife coordinator, and he's really invested a lot of time building relationships with landowners. And he's working on a flattery project here, but you don't get this work done until you build the trust with landowners. So, and that goes for all of us, Jamie, Eric. It's amazing to watch our team forge those relationships over time, and really, really critical lesson that we've learned. So I'm going to stop, Erica, and I'll stop the share, and I'll turn our time over to Eric. So thank you.
Okay.
I think you're up. And perfect. Thanks.
I'll just start my timer here. All right, everybody. Eric Graham, Blackfoot Challenge Wildlife Program Coordinator. I just thought I'd start by just talking a little bit about growing up. So I grew up in Missoula, Montana, which is more of a liberal college town. And at a young age, we had ranch and family friends in rural Montana. And so from a young age, I learned how to kind of take a hard time from a rancher, one for being from Missoula, knapweed, living in a more liberal part of Montana. And then some days I wonder how I got wrapped up in working with grizzly bears and wolves. Well, I was in college, non-traditional student. I was a little bit older and took a credit course at the Hunter Game Check Station, and I met Jamie Jonkel, and he found out I had work study, so I started working for him, and then eventually ended up working with bears and wolves, and then eventually with the Blackfoot Challenge. So I just like to share that because it to me, that was such an important part of my learning and understanding, getting into this role of the work I do, learning how to work with folks, like Seth said earlier, on both sides of the aisle. So anyways, a lot of what I do is work on connecting dots. I'm out in the watershed as much as I can be, getting to know the local landowners, the ranch managers, the community members, doing a lot of talks at the schools, bear aware talks, bear smart talks, and having done this for 25 some years now, it's been amazing to see those kids grow up and take on some of these ideas themselves as to how to be maybe a little more bear aware, a little more bear smart in their communities. A lot of these kids are teaching their folks and their grandparents, how to carry bear spray and contain attractants and all of what we do. So our role as an NGO is to help, stay in touch and be in the loop with our agency partners, but then also be out there on the ground. And a lot of times I'm helping share the information. So I'm talking to Lee and Denny and hearing what they have to say out there on the ground. And a lot of times they're busy, so I'm sharing that information with Jamie and back and forth. And so we all together as a team work to make this happen. So a lot of partners. It's a long list of folks we work with, which gets at the collaboration piece, right? We want to make sure as many people as possible are sitting at the table. Sometimes that gets a little difficult. You know, when you're talking about things like grizzly bears and wolves, there's a lot of emotion that comes with it. So we used to say, not so sure these numbers are totally accurate these days, but we used to say we had this 80-20 rule where people could come to a meeting, we could generally get along and be on the same page with 80% of our thinking, and those harder, tougher feelings we had, we left that 20% of those at the door, so we could come into a meeting, have a more productive meeting, and try to meet in the middle and get things done. We want to be out there on the ground as much as possible. I used to be out there a lot. Anymore, as I've rolled into a coordinator position, I'm not out there as much as I used to be. So, but we've got to be connecting with the folks out there living there on the ground to figure out what our community wants from us. We talk a lot about multi-species coexistence, right? You just heard this word earlier. Something I've learned along the way is a lot of these folks out there in our community don't necessarily like that word coexistence. So sometimes it's just those little pieces of the puzzle you learn how to talk and how to go about things. So like I said earlier, I've been working with Jamie for some 25 years now. And as I rolled into working with the Blackfoot Challenge, I actually kept some of those duties that I do with Jamie. So I am an employee of the Blackfoot Challenge, but I sign paperwork every year to be a volunteer with Fish, Life, and Parks, so I can continue to do you know, that kind of work with him, which a lot of that in the beginning was you know, bear management. And so as we're responding to conflicts, you're dealing with folks who are having a problem. And before you'd say, hey, how about an electric fence? How about a bear resistant garbage can? You know, you're trying to get ahead of things. And I can't tell you how many times I heard, but I've never had a problem. And so you offer up these tools. Folks don't always want them, but sometimes it's when they're having that conflict that I find, I'll say with conflict comes the opportunity to work closer with folks. And so if at the time I had a grizzly bear trap in the back of my truck and people wanted me to be setting that trap, I'd say, hey, we can't set this trap until we contain your attractants. So we get a temporary electric fence, we get out the bear resistant containers, and then I'd say, I have to be able to show Jamie we did a good job here before we get to setting that trap. So I think a lot of amazing opportunities came there. Just so folks know, this is a long learning curve, 15 to 20 years for some folks. Some of the electric fences we built were literally after 20 years of grizzly bear conflicts, year after year after year, and then finally folks would come around. I see I'm running a little long here, so I'll leave it at that and let the next person talk.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So like I said earlier, my name is Lee Kelly, and our operation consists of a cow-calf operation as well as the bison herd growing alfalfa. We have bee yards on the place. And one of the things I neglected to say earlier is about 15 years ago, ranch ownership also introduced a very 5-star posh luxury resort. So on top of trying to manage the agricultural pieces, it also kind of sits squarely with me to make sure as we have people out recreating, as we have camps and dining and food and pavilions, that we're kind of doing our best to not have attractants. I'm also on the board of the Blackfoot Challenge. I've been in that role for about 10 years. I should probably start by saying I am not a bear or wolf lover by nature. I don't know that they culturally are really important to me. What I do know is that everything has a place on the landscape, and I value them for that. I also know that as a parent raising young kids, it's pretty important to me to offer my kids an opportunity to see all of those species still existing on a landscape. I don't know that we're coexisting quite yet, but we are tolerating and learning how to live alongside of them. The Blackfoot Challenge, like everybody has said, made this platform and this table for everybody to come together and be able to talk. And so one of the big things in those conversations that I had to shift my mind of is when wolves and grizzly bears first started coming on the landscape, there was this agency versus rancher mentality. And I had to really get through my head that the agency folks that were on the ground that were trying to get the work done, those were not the people that were making the rules, right? And furthermore, sometimes they didn't necessarily support how the process was going, but by being an adversary with them, we were really delaying time. And it became really valuable when the agency folks that we were working with in the valley realized that, most producers, we weren't poachers, we weren't crooks, we were ethical people that were raising our kids and running businesses and trying to teach those kids integrity and keeping generations and generations of people on the landscape, honoring traditions that our grandfathers and great grandfathers put together. We for those reasons, we participate in numerous programs with the challenge. And I guess I'll just kind of talk through specifically what our operation has done to reduce conflict on the ranch and within the resort. So the number one thing that we changed on our outfit was we changed our calving season. We stopped calving cows in January and February, and we moved our calving season to align more with native calving systems. We reduced our death loss by doing that. So that was probably the number one thing that as an operator, we had to decide we weren't going to fight that system. And because we did that, it decreased our death loss significantly. And the death loss that we were having, we started participating in the carcass removal program. So we no longer had boneyards on the ranch. So we removed that attractant for when grizzlies and wolves did come around. Kind of the third thing we did on our place was we introduced Coriani cattle to our cattle herds. We kind of learned by watching some behavior and studying some animals that those females had a different mothering type of ability. And in addition to that, they had a set of horns, which positioned them better to go into the leases and go into the mountains. They had a different type of awareness to them. We also participate in the Range Rider program with the challenge, which helps us know what's going on, right? Like we're typically putting up hay and crops during the summer season when our cows are out on the range. We're certainly guilty of not being able to get out there as often as we would like to. So having a range rider and somebody that's communicating when they're seeing scat and when they're seeing track, and that can kind of help us make management decisions of if we needed to move animals around or herd animals different places or have a bigger presence. All of our bee yards are fenced, grain storage and those sorts of attractants, the things that were simple and easy to do. It was a no-brainer to just not have that conflict and not have that attractant and create a conflict. We don't use widespread electric fence on the ranch at all, but we do use it anywhere where we would have attractants. Another tool in our toolbox that we're slowly stepping into, and if I could go back 10 years, I'd have done it sooner. we're starting, not only at the challenge is starting to kick around the idea, but on our operation specifically, we're starting to use guard dogs, which are serving as really good alarm bells and significantly impacting like our notification system. You know, they're different in a range rider in the sense that they're always around, you're not paying them. And I wish, if I, you know, hindsight's 2020, I wish we would have kind of got on board with that a little bit sooner, started understanding that sooner. The guard dogs certainly have their challenges. They're roamers and they turn up on neighbors in various places. It takes a whole lot of communication within your neighborhood to do that and do it smooth. But it is another one of the tools in the toolbox that we're using. You know, probably my biggest takeaway, we're all talking about reducing conflict with animals and how important that is. But I think personally for me, reducing the conflict within our business and home is what is important and what is making it sustainable. So I guess that's why I continue as a producer to show up to the table, to communicate with my agency folks. I mean, Jamie Junkel and I will talk throughout the summer when we have bear issues going on. I respect his opinion. I want his input. I know he wants my feedback. I know I can reach out to Eric at any point when I'm kind of struggling through a scenario. We had a grizzly bear turn up and feed in our alfalfa fields all summer last year. And he was a well-behaved grizzly bear. As Jamie said, he was a grizzly bear doing grizzly bear things, right? He ate alfalfa, he ate gophers, he stayed out of trouble. And I guess you're happy to have a bear that behaves like that. But I think just the biggest part for me is to reduce the conflict of what I hope to someday pass down to my kids. I'd like to someday package up something that doesn't have a ton of stress and turmoil. And that is why I've worked so hard to kind of try to collaborate with everybody that the Blackfoot Challenge opens up to come to the table. I'll stop over talking.
Thanks, Lee. I guess I'm next. Denny Iverson. Our family ranch is, like I said, just west of Lee and Kyle's operation over there at the Paws Up in Greeno. And we're in a little different situation down here in that we have a lot of residences around the perimeter of the valley here. The valley floor is still pretty much in agriculture, but a lot of the foothills were subdivided and started subdividing 30, 40 years ago. And so there's a lot of homes here. When you drive through the valley, you don't really see them, but then you take any of the side roads and get back in the trees and there's houses everywhere. And so as a ranching family, we've ran cattle as far east of us as Ovando, up in the middle of Blackfoot, about, you know, a 45-minute drive for us. And we didn't have any grizzly bears in our part of the watershed, you know, even as much as 10 years ago. There might have been one or two pass through, but they weren't setting up camp here. And so like Lee, I think our story is a lot like Lee in Lee's story there at Paws Up, as far as the you know, reducing the attractants, picking up our dead animals and getting them composted, and you know, all those tools. We use a range rider also in the summer. And I think I wanted to just comment on the range rider piece. It's just really nice to have somebody out there communicating back to us what's going on. You know, your cows are calm, or I'm seeing wolf scat, or I'm seeing bear scat, or whatever. And then, you know, you can just kind of let them keep an eye on things. And that communication piece of the range rider program is the most important piece. And I like to say that, you know, elk and deer cost us a lot more money every year, the damage they do and the crops, the amount of forage they eat, than grizzly bears or wolves ever will cost us. We just feed a lot of ungulates, but the bears have found us, and they've also found a lot of these smaller 10 and 20 acre tracts around us with folks that have, you know, a chicken coop and they have a few sheep or they've got some goats and so they've got a lot of attractants and they're up in the trees. So it's a little easier for the grizzly bears to hide and move from place to place. And so the bears that have been coming into our neighborhood have been getting into more trouble, not at their fault, but there's just more things they can get into. And so as a ranching family, we have to, you know, try to communicate to those folks when we can, when the opportunity arises that, you know, well, the bears were here a long time ago and yeah, they've come back and we've got to learn to live with them. And that's what I call putting yourself out there sometimes. It's not always comfortable. My wife, we have one place in our town that we can get like my wife says, a clean bite to eat. In other words, go out to dinner, and it's the local bar and country store. And I don't know how many times we've been sitting there and you hear a conversation behind you about bears or wolves. And sometimes it's just not good, correct information that they have, or they're getting it. Yeah, I don't know where they're getting it, and my wife will look at me and, you know, I just have that look in my eye, like, I gotta get involved in this conversation. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Depends on how much alcohol has been involved in the table behind us. But I'm never looking for a fight, but I'm always open to having a good conversation with folks that maybe not may not be in the loop as much as I am and our family is, being involved with the challenge and participating in the programs and stuff. And garbage was a big problem down here. And my nephew was working with Jamie and Eric a lot, trying to solve some of those solutions or some of those problems. And now we all have bear resistant garbage cans, and folks were slow to you know, accept that they had to have a big heavy garbage can that you can't lift in the back of your pickup anymore to take down to the collection spot or whatever. And but we all, you know, we as a family said, well, that's what you got to do. We're going to be living with these bears. And so you have to be an advocate for the programs. Like Lee, I'm not a big fan of grizzly bears and wolves. Life would be a lot easier without them, but they're here. And I think, like David Mannix likes to say, there's a lot more people who want them on the landscape than those that don't. And so it's just a lot better for us to cooperate, advocate for their existence. And I've got really, really good friends in the ranching community and hunting community and so forth that don't necessarily agree with me, but we can have a conversation at least and come to some kind of understanding. Yeah, I think you know, I mentioned earlier that we did have cattle up in the middle of Blackfoot for a long time, and in the summertime, and we kind of finally decided, you know, we were getting some predation up there, and it was a long ways away, and there was a lot of reasons to give up those pastures, but one of the reasons was the predation that we were facing, and I'll also say that having bears on the landscape changes how you operate day to day. You just don't go bumbling down through a creek bottom. You know, I remember a couple of years ago, I have an irrigation pump that is pumping out of a pond, and it's an irrigation pond. But anyway, I have to walk across this little footbridge across the creek, and the grass is always, you know, shoulder high and the brush, and I'm bumbling across there like I do every day, and boom, I get across the bridge, and here's this big matted down area, probably 10 feet in diameter, and a big pile of bear poop in the middle of it. And the hair came up in the back of my neck, and I thought, holy cow, I have got to be more aware of my surroundings now that we have these apex predators on the landscape. So it does change how you go about your day-to-day business. And, you know, I feel like if I'm on a four-wheeler or side by side buzzing through a field or whatever, I can outrun them. But if I'm out there with my dog and, you know, dinking around, or maybe we're hunting ducks on the creek or something like that in the fall, it's in the back of my mind all the time, you know, that maybe And I do carry some bear spray, probably not as often as I should. But we do let some kids fish in the creek, and I always tell them, pack your bear spray. There's grizzly bears in this part of the world, and the creeks and the river bottoms are their highways. So, and that's just part of that advocacy piece that I feel like if I'm going to be on the challenge board and I'm going to operate in this landscape, and we're going to continue to advocate for farms and ranches staying in business in this landscape, then we need to advocate for those programs that help us all live with bears. But like I said, they found our Potomac Valley, and so a lot of our neighbors are learning to live with them, and as well as us too. So, but I'll kind of stop there. I hope that we can have a little bit of conversation about our composting facility, and maybe Randy, you can talk about that a little bit. I'll turn it over to you quickly for that. We call it the shit show, and you'll understand why.
Well, I don't want to run too much into Jamie's time, but I think that has been one of our big success stories, is the compost site, which Seth referenced, and just that ability to get dead stock off the landscape. And not only are we composting livestock there, the Department of Transportation picks up roadkill and composts there also, which is also a win-win for wildlife. So we were getting wood chips from the mill to do that composting, and we have a primary pickup during calving season and then a secondary pickup outside of calving season. But before I run too long, I'm gonna let Jamie run with his time. And if there's questions about the compost site or anything else, the other thing I would say is if you want to see any of this in action, please come to the Blackfoot. We do tours regularly, so happy to show off how any of this works on site. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, again, James Jonkel. And I thought first I'd give you a little background on bear activity in the Blackfoot and how it has changed over the last 30 years. I worked elsewhere on bears, Wyoming, Alaska, got to go to the Russian Far East. I was in Idaho, I was in British Columbia, got to see a lot of country. My father was a bear biologist and worked a lot in Canada on polar bears and black bears in the lower 48 and then grizzlies as well. But I was lucky to get a permanent job back at home in Missoula, Montana, where I sort of spent my high school years. And it was wonderful having a real job for once in my life. But when I started working up in the Blackfoot Valley, I was not a bear manager. I was a wildlife management area sort of fencing technician. And of course, I appeared on the scene with I call them grizzly bear sunglasses. I've always worked on bears, so I've been very keyed into bear activity. And one of the first things I noticed in the Blackfoot Valley was I was seeing a lot of grizzly bear activity. And at that time, they were just starting to show up 30 years ago. And I remember telling my bosses, like, oh man, I found some family group activity of female grizzly with two yearlings, up in the Blackfoot. And everyone was like, oh, no, it's not, no way. They're in the Bob Marshall. And so over the last 30 years, it went from just, a couple females, a few roving males, just starting to set up shop to today, when we estimate that we have probably 60 resident grizzly bears in the Blackfoot Valley. So it went from a handful to 60 in 30 years. And we're starting to see grizzlies popping up all over the place in western Montana. A lot of the ones that are showing up in the Deer Lodge Valley and the Bitterroot Valley are actually coming from this population that has developed in the Blackfoot Valley. So, in your area, you said you just had a handful of bears now. The sooner you can kind of get ahead of the 8 ball and start developing these sort of community-based management approaches to working with a species like grizzlies, the better, because you get ahead of the game. and you can prepare the community for the future. See, I'll tell you a little bit about how our agency sort of functions with grizzly bear management. So here in Region 2, that's one of many regions in Montana, we have a bear management team that consists of 4. I work closely with a fellow named Eli Hampson, another fellow named Brad Ballas, and another fellow named Brandon Davis. And our team sort of works over the entire sort of area. And I was sort of the first. I worked with various interns, but one of the areas where I first, put my attention to was the Blackfoot Valley, because this is where we were seeing grizzlies. Elsewhere in the region, we were having black bear issues, so it allowed me to kind of start, working with various community members, various, county entities, etc., on black bears. But in the Blackfoot, thank God the Blackfoot Challenge was there. It was this sort of tremendous structure or foundation of organization. And had the Blackfoot Challenge not been there, I mean, I'd have been spinning my wheels, getting nothing done. But, being able to, work through the Blackfoot Challenge and through the Wildlife Committee and sort of developing these relationships with the ranchers and landowners and various towns, we were able to make great headway over time as in partnership. We also, all of us learned that, how valuable it was to work in partnership with, these watershed work groups, these NGOs, a lot of folks that work for agencies, I think, go it alone, and they don't partner up with all the folks living on the landscape. And I think that's, that's an error. You have to get out there and work with everyone and manage, a species like bears or wolves together. Because, agency folks can't do it alone. We learned that very early. And all the guys that I work with are, trying to take that Blackfoot Challenge model and working with watershed work groups and bear smart communities to get that sort of baseline structure first, so that you can move forward and roll up your sleeves and start helping people deal with all these grizzly bears that show up on the landscape. So in Montana, there are bear managers elsewhere. Up in Region 1, that's that Flathead Valley area, they also have 3 bear managers there. Each one of those bear managers has a intern. And there, rather than working together, they have each a small territory. And they do things that are very similar to what we do. I think maybe not in as much of a partnership mode. Like we work hand in hand with the Blackfoot Challenge. We work hand in hand with Defenders of Wildlife. We work hand in hand with one of our sister agencies, Wildlife Services. We have a new watershed work group down the Bitterroot that we work with. We have a new watershed work group up in the Deer Lodge Valley that we work with. And I just think that's key. Up in Region 1, they've got similar approaches. Down in the Yellowstone ecosystem, they have a bear manager down there with an intern that's doing all sorts of cool things. On the Rocky Mountain front, they have 2 bear managers with technicians, and they're doing all sorts of cool things there, different approaches. You might want to make a study of how each of the regions approach, grizzly bear management. But I think it's key that, everyone work together and you share all the information. Like we do a regular bear update on our Missoula Bears website where we just pour out everything we know about every black bear, every mountain lion, every grizzly. You know, it's all right there. And I tell a lot of stories about why bears are doing the things they do, interesting little anecdotal things, you know, sharing pictures. We try to get a really good relationship with at least a couple people in every little neighborhood we can possibly think of. And it's kind of interesting. We almost have this army of individuals out there that we're working with on a daily basis. They're sending us video. They're keeping us updated on female black bear doing this, female grizzly doing that. And I'm getting all that information and I'm sharing that information with Eric, and Eric is sharing it with everyone he runs into in the Blackfoot Valley. And it just creates a really good atmosphere of open communication. You know, in the Potomac Valley where Denny was just talking about, Justin Iverson, is he your nephew? I think nephew, right? I mean, he's been a godsend for us in the Potomac Valley because it's Potomac Valley's a handful. You know, we're starting to see a lot of grizzlies show up in there, and we just have little ranchettes tucked up in the mountains, people doing kind of urban homesteading, rural, you know, modern day homesteading, and chickens and pigs. And we got the lions and black bears and grizzly bears and wolves in there. And yeah, but the stuff that has happened just in the Potomac Valley the last few years is amazing. We've got tremendous communication in the valley. There's a Facebook page where everyone's talking, you know, amongst themselves. Community members actually came to the county commissioners meetings and begged for a garbage ordinance for the entire area. We got a special bear mitigation area and an ordinance plopped on top of the valley, and our conflicts have gone down as a result. So I guess the messaging I have is, you know, work together, always work together, and involve your agency guys. If you have some agency guys that are tough to work with, just go to their bosses and let them know that, hey, we want to work with the agency, you know, and how do we do that, you know, because that's key, being able to all work together.
Thank you, James, and thank you everyone on the panel that spoke there. There's some really important information and experiences from you all that we have, yeah, a lot of years ahead of us, I think, to get to the point where you are all today, but it's really inspirational for us as an organization and a resident as well. So thank you all so much for speaking to all of that. Just at the front of my mind, if this is a question that I have, if one of you could touch on the Range Riders program a little bit more, from a standpoint of who is the employer? Are they paid by the Blackfoot Challenge? Just a little bit more on what that program looks like.
Eric, you want to take that since you're coordinating our range riders and you have been a range rider? That'd be awesome.
Sure, and you know, jump in, anyone here. So when Seth was the coordinator, he started, well, I guess he and Greg and Jamie, I'm guessing, started the Range Rider program with Erica Mannix. I think that was 2007, 2008, just to see if range riding was a good fit for our watershed or not, and indeed it was. And so throughout the years, we've cobbled this together in numerous ways. When I was hired on as a range rider, I was paid through the Blackfoot Challenge with a seasonal position. And so after Erica, there was a gentleman who did it for 2 years seasonally, then moved on to another full-time position. Then there was another gentleman who did it for 2 years and then moved on to a permanent position. So then when I came on, and did it for 2 years seasonally, then I too was looking for a permanent position. And that's when the challenge and all of our partners pulled together and said, wait a minute here, you know, we want to try to retain a person in this position. In 2 years, you're really just getting your feet on the ground and figuring out all the folks and how this works the best. But what I thought was so handy with our range rider position was also coupling it with the grizzly bear works. So then when you're talking to ranchers and ranch managers and landowners, you're asking them, how's it going with the bears and the wolves? And then, like Denny said earlier, they'd say, well, it's the damn elk that are driving us crazy. But yeah, so the Blackfoot Challenge hires and pays most of our range riders. In more recent years, we have partnered up with Wildlife Services Non-Lethal in some positions. And then we also, like Jamie said, we'll partner up with Defenders of Wildlife and Livestock Loss Board and various other groups to pull off these range rider positions. Sometimes, if push comes to shove and we're running low on funding, we actually have to ask the landowners and ranch managers to help us pay for those positions. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but primarily hired through the Blackfoot Challenge.
Great. Thanks, Eric. So yeah, for everyone in the audience, please feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A. We're into kind of open. Uh-oh, am I back? Okay. Yes, into the Q&A, pop questions in chat. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes left here. So I'm just seeing a question from Garth here. So what was the original motivation for creating the challenge? It sounds like this happened before grizzly bears came along. And second, where do you get your funding for your programs?
Sure. Denny, you want me to just jump in on that, or do you want to jump in on? Okay, so Blackfoot Challenge, some of the early conversations really go back into the 1970s about how the rural way of life was of concern to local residents. That was changing as people were moving to Montana. But some of the early conversations were around, say, non-native noxious weed species. That was sort of one of the big reasons landowners are starting to come to the table to talk about weeds on Forest Service or BLM. These are federal lands. There was also concerns about the river and designating it as a wild and scenic river. And there's a long story behind that, but weeds, the Blackfoot River were some of the early conversations, and just in general, wanting to work across both those federal land ownerships and private land ownerships were some of the early motivations. So that's right. And then we formed in 1993. So Grizzly Bears came later. Funding, we use a whole variety of sources, but mainly it's a mixture of public and private sources. So public would be both state of Montana, and then federal sources. That's about 35 to 40% of our budget. And then the balance is found from private foundations, from grant writing, individual donors. But that's just sort of in a nutshell when we formed, why we formed, and how we get some of our funding today. Thanks.
Thanks, Seth.
Sure.
We've got a question here from Chloe. So it sounds like meetings or various forums which are fostering communications between all the various partnerships within the watershed is a common theme for success for you. Can you break down some components that could be modeled elsewhere that makes a successful meeting? So food was noted later, meeting time was noted, but any other things to model off of there?
I'll
just jump in briefly, or go ahead, Denny. You go.
We have our board, and it's made up of stakeholders in the valley, and And those stakeholders are, farmers and ranchers and business people, the timber industry, and then all of our and interested parties, but also all of our agencies, our state and federal agencies, and they are required to put somebody on the board. And as you all know, up in Canada as well, folks, move within those agencies, and so one thing we kind of demand from our agencies is that they whoever comes in as the area manager for the BLM or the district ranger for the Forest Service or whatever, anyway, the top person in that tier, they are going to sit on the Blackfoot Challenge board, so that we can have them at the table, that they can understand what's going on, and they can also make decisions, right? And tell us, yeah, we can do this or we can do that. The other big piece I think of our meetings is that we set aside a big chunk of our meetings every month at the end of the meeting for information exchange. And we just go around the room or go around the Zoom, and everybody tells what's going on in their agency, on their ranch, and their business or whatever. And that's so important to have that good communication piece there. I think what Seth was talking about earlier with the evening meetings was our wildlife committee. And mostly, I mean, our board still meets during the day, but our wildlife committee, we, like he said, didn't have any farmers and ranchers showing up because they were during the day, they were in town. And so we started out with we called it the Rancher 7 because we have 7 communities, and we tried to get somebody from each community to come together. And this is when grizzly bears were first coming on the scene, and then later wolves, but we started having those in the evenings and providing dinner, and that was super helpful to get folks to the table. And then I can't emphasize enough, I hate public meetings. And because oftentimes they become I'll just put it bluntly, a bitch fest. And so having an organization like the Blackfoot Challenge to coordinate those meetings, and we take on a lot of things we really don't really want to take on sometimes, but we feel like we're the only ones that can. And we kind of set the rules at the beginning of the meeting. There'll be no talking over one another. You'll all get a chance to talk. And we set those rules early and often, and that helps frame our meetings so that they stay civil. And people sometimes they just want to get things off their chest, right? And they get the opportunity to do that, but they don't get to do it over someone else that has a differing opinion. So that's super important too.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, that's great. Seth, do you have anything to add there? Or?
I just was noticing, Brandy, did you want to jump in? I thought you had maybe a thought.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is inviting everyone to the table. They may not show up, but those people you don't invite probably are going to throw a wrench in the process later. But also you can't just have meetings. So at some point you have to do projects or get something done. And so you gotta find that balance, but you can tell if you've just been doing meetings and not enough getting stuff done. When people stop showing up, your crowd gets thinner. Like you missed a step there, and getting the process right, which is exactly what Denny's talking about. Having respect, having some rules, and following that process. One of our processes is if we meet as a board, not the wildlife committee, but as a board, and something comes up about wildlife and the committee hasn't discussed it, it gets tabled immediately because we're not going to ignore the committee. Committees go away really quickly when you ignore them, and I've seen it happen in a lot of organizations. So just a few other thoughts there. Seth, back to you.
No, that's great. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Denny. I would just add that all of our committees, whether it's forestry, wildlife, education, those are chaired resident. So resident or landowner in the watershed, that's very, very helpful. I think as Denny mentioned, just to reiterate, our board is composed of all the different land ownership jurisdictions in the watershed, and they have those permanent seats at the table. That's been critical for 30 years. I would also say that I think another piece that's transferable is that we are nonpartisan. We do not engage in litigation, and we're not advocacy based. And so we've had proposed mines, like, huge gold mining operations proposed, and people have said to the Blackfoot Challenge, why don't you take a stand on that? Well, we say we will lose all of we will lose those folks who may want a job at a mine. We need to keep people at the table. And so we don't take positions, even if they're controversial positions. We always will provide information to the community and let the community members make those decisions about what they want to advocate for or not. But that's been very important over all the years to keeping lots of different people at the table. But feel free to jump in, Lee or Jamie or anyone else on that. It's a great question. Thank you.
I'll just say that I've noticed in our wildlife committee, you guys in the past did a great job finding, well-respected, thoughtful individuals in each of those communities, to be a part of our group. So everybody works well together, even if they see things differently.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you to all of you. I think we've got time for probably 2 more questions here. So a question from Sonia. How do you tackle fear-based perspectives on grizzlies with residents and landowners when the bears are first starting to show up on the human landscape and are new and uncomfortable for folks?
Right, Jamie?
Yes,
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. And then Eric, I think you'd have a good perspective too. It takes time. A lot of the folks that I've worked with at first, are just totally, like, no, I do not want to have to deal with grizzly bears at all. I'm fearful for my children. Please get them out of here, and over time, as they sort of start to understand bear behavior and the reasons why bears do certain things, some of that fear goes away. It's always good to keep that baseline fear there and that respect for grizzly bears. But the more you learn about the species and bear behavior, you lose that sort of intentional or emotional fear, and you start to understand the species more. But it just flat takes time. I mean, you can talk till you're blue in the face for 10 hours with someone that is terrified about going into grizzly country, and really the only way to resolve that is be patient and give them as much information about grizzly bear behavior as possible. If needed, go out with them, show them bear sign, show them bears digging up, badger dens, digging for pocket gopher caches, just getting them to understand the species. It's no different really than, people learning about other human cultures. It's a lengthy process, and it's mostly through communication and education and sharing of cool videos and telling lots of stories and educating in a manner that isn't condescending, but that is informational.
I guess I'm just gonna chime in just real quick on that, Jamie, to follow up. Like in my mind, there's a time and a place to have some real fear. Denny mentioned earlier the garbage problem, which we were having in Potomac, which was extensive. And the grizzly bears were frequenting all these small 10-acre properties checking garbage cans, either getting rewards or not. And that, even from somebody who's dealing with grizzlies on a large landscape as a landowner, that was pretty fearful. That was not letting your kids walk outside at night to lock chickens up in the chicken coop. That was a different level of awareness until we kind of got that garbage can piece figured out. But I just wanted to add to your comments, Jamie, that another way that shifted fear for me was that education piece and you being so good about sharing and teaching, but you also provided resources. When we had, you know, young grizzly bears that were getting way too comfortable around here, you were quick to come to us and say, well, let's get you outfitted with the, I'll screw up the verbiage here, but with whatever the right permits were to allow Kyle and I to put a little bit of pressure on those bears and move them off their property and help them learn to respect humans again. Like I think part of what reduced fear for me was being able to go to agency folks and knowing I had a resource and they were going to try to outfit us to put a little bit of fear back in our bears where they would respect us and not want to have such close interactions. And of course, like you had to talk people off the ledge, right? Like you were talking us off the ledge last year when we had bears foraging around a bunch of canvas tents, and you were like, well, Lee's just gonna be doing bear things, and you were 100% right. But I think it's been multiple pieces. There's been segments of time where the fear was real and it should have been there. That was like self-preservation kicking in. Then there's the irrational fear too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, one thing that we do here in Region 2, which I think other agencies might consider this, is we do volunteer up people, you know, that are living right at the ranch. You know, if you can get one individual that's good, you know, even keeled, good hand, you know, and get them volunteered up and get them some training, you know, that person can respond a lot quicker than we can. You know, half the time it takes us 2 hours, you know, to get up the Blackfoot with our shotgun and our rubber bullets and our cracker shells and all that kind of thing. So having sort of local volunteers that are protected under the umbrella of our take permit has been extremely useful, very valuable.
Thank you. Thanks to you both. We are approaching 6:30 now, so if anybody in the audience needs to head off, thank you so much for joining. One last question that maybe we could quickly address in the Q&A here from Andrew. What was the scale of conflict you were seeing at the start of the program? And has there been any publications outlining the success of the program in reducing conflicts?
Yeah, Seth can talk about some of the publications, but you know, when grizzly bears first appeared in the valley, there weren't very many. And you know, for the number of bears, we might have had a large number of conflicts. So the data kind of looks a little skewed because over that 30-year period, it went from 2 or 3 bears, you know, to 60 or more. You know, we might have 60 residents in the valley, but you're constantly getting rovers coming through. And some of those rovers, you know, have been up in the Swan Valley or on the Flathead Indian Reservation that are, you know, bringing their background with them. You know, bears can learn bad habits all over the place, and you know, they can come to you with their bad habits. So to look at conflict levels, it can be a little confusing. It's not simple, it's not cut and dry. But as our population has increased, we've seen more conflicts, but that's because there's more bears and more people moving in. But overall, I think in the Blackfoot Valley, just like we're seeing in the Potomac Valley, I mean, people are on top of their game anymore. And a lot of the bears that are living, you know, in the Blackfoot, you know, they haven't learned the bad habits. Some of them go elsewhere and then come back with some bad habits. And occasionally, you know, we'll get a new individual moving into town that, or the community that will train up 4 or 5 bears. Doesn't take much to train them up. I don't know if that answers your question, but and then Seth can talk to you about some of the papers that have been written.
Sure. Yeah. And happy, Erica, to get you a list of some of the stuff we've published that sort of summarizes what we talked about tonight in a little more detail. So got several book chapters and some peer-reviewed articles. Happy to share that, both on wolves and on bears. I would also just say we've hired a new science director. We're really excited about sort of increasing our monitoring of both bear and wolves, and hopefully there'll be some additional research that will come out of our work. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, in respect of everybody's time here, we are 2 minutes past 6:30 Pacific time, and it's even later for all of those joining us in Montana. So we'll wrap up there, but thank you so much to each of you panelists for joining us, and to everyone in the audience for listening along. Hopefully you learned something new or can take something home with you today that might be a part of the coexistence journey in the future. But yeah, thank you so much to the Blackfoot Challenge and your team for joining us tonight.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Jolene. Good to see you, Atlanta.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone. Be in touch, and you're always welcome to come see us.